Here we go. Shalom, everyone. I'm Brother Doug, and we are the Awakened by Yahuwah Fellowship Group. I'm with my sister Shoshana, my brother Bobby, my sister Kristen, my sister Sally, and our brother Dennis. And we are continuing the study. This is part 2 of the book of Enoch's Sabbath study. And we are going to be starting chapter 89. I am going to have Sister Sally, Brother Bobby and Sister Kristen break up the chapter of 89 since it's a long chapter. So, guys, take the floor.
From the death of Noah to the Exodus, and they began to bring forth beasts of the field and birds, so that there arose different genera: lions, tigers, wolves, dogs, hyenas, wild boars, foxes, squirrels, swine, falcons, vultures, kites, eagles, and ravens. And among them was born a white bull, and they began to bite one another. But that white bull, which was born amongst them, begot a wild ass, and a white bull with it, and the wild asses multiplied. But that bull, which was born from him, begot a black wild boar, and a white sheep, and the former begot many boars. But that sheep begot 12 sheep. And when those 12 sheep had grown, they gave up one of them to the asses. And those
Sally,
asses
are you reading 89?
Well, it doesn't say 89.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm in the wrong. I was in the next chapter after 89. Let me start over.
No problem.
I'm sorry. Okay. The deluge and the deliverance of Noah. And one of those 4 went to that white bull and instructed him in a secret, without his being terrified. He was born a bull and became a man, and built for himself a great vessel, and dwelt thereon. And 3 bulls dwelt with him in that vessel, and they were covered in. And again I raised mine eyes towards heaven, and saw a lofty roof, with 7 water torrents thereon. And those torrents flowed with much water into an enclosure. And I saw again, and behold, fountains were opened on the surface of that great enclosure, and that water began to swell and rise upon the surface. And I saw that enclosure till all its surface was covered with water. And the water, the darkness, and mist increased upon it. And as just a second, I got to turn the page. And as I looked at the height of the water had risen above the height of that enclosure, and was streaming over that enclosure, and it stood upon the earth. And all the cattle of that enclosure were gathered together, until I saw how they sank, and were swallowed up, and perished in that water. But that vessel floated on the water, while all the oxen and elephants and camels and asses sank to the bottom with all the animals, so that I could no longer see them, and they were not able to escape, but perished and sank into the depths. And again I saw in the vision till those water torrents were removed from that high roof, and the chasms of the earth were leveled up, and other abysses were opened. Then the water began to run down into these, till the earth became visible. But that vessel settled on the earth, and the darkness retired, and light appeared. But that white bull, which had become a man, came out of that vessel, and the 3 bulls with him. And one of those 3 was white like that bull, and one of them was red as blood, and one black, and that white bull departed from them. Mine is divided there. Did you want me to read on?
I think we can have Bobby and Kristen come in if they're able to.
You sure that's only verse 10?
Oh, that's only verse 10? Oh, okay. Let's see. So there's Sally, can you read like I would say up to halfway.
Sure.
Okay.
And they began to bring forth beasts of the field and birds, so that there arose different genera: lions, tigers, wolves, dogs, hyenas, wild boars, foxes, squirrels, swine, falcons, vultures, kites, eagles, and ravens. And among them was born a white bull, and they began to bite one another. But that white bull, which was born amongst them, begot a wild ass, and a white bull with it. And the wild asses multiplied. But that bull which was born from him begot a black wild boar and a white sheep. And the former begot many boars. But that sheep begot 12 sheep. And when those 12 sheep had grown, they gave up one of them to the asses, and those asses again gave up that sheep to the wolves, and that sheep grew up among the wolves. And the master brought the 11 sheep to live with it, and to pasture with it among the wolves. And they multiplied and became many flocks of sheep. And the wolves began to fear them. And they oppressed them, and they destroyed their little ones, and they cast their young into a river of much water. But those sheep began to cry aloud on account of their little ones, and to complain unto their master. And a sheep which had been saved from the wolves fled and escaped to the wild asses. And I saw the sheep, how they lamented and cried and besought their master with all their might, till that master of the sheep descended at the voice of the sheep from a lofty abode, and came to them and pastured them. And he called that sheep which had escaped the wolves, and spake with it concerning the wolves, that it should admonish them not to touch the sheep. And the sheep went to the wolves according to the word of the master, and another sheep met it and went with it. And the two went and entered together into the assembly of those wolves, and spake with them, and admonished them not to touch the sheep from henceforth. And thereupon I saw the wolves, and how they oppressed the sheep exceedingly with all their power, and the sheep cried aloud. And the master came to the sheep, and they began to smite those wolves, and the wolves began to make lamentation. But the sheep became quiet, and forthwith ceased to cry out. And I saw the sheep till they departed from amongst the wolves. But the eyes of the wolves were blinded, and those wolves departed in pursuit of the sheep with all their power. And the master of the sheep went with them as their leader, and all his sheep followed him. And his face was dazzling and glorious, or splendorous, and terrible to behold. But the wolves began to pursue those sheep till they reached a sea of water. And that sea was divided, and the water stood on this side and on that before their face. And their master led them and placed himself between them and the wolves. And as those wolves did not yet see the sheep, they proceeded into the midst of that sea. And the wolves followed the sheep, and those wolves ran after them into that sea. And when they saw the master of the sheep, they turned to flee from before his face. But that sea gathered itself together and became as it had been created. And the water swelled and rose till it covered those wolves. And I saw till all the wolves who pursued those sheep perished and were drowned.
That's 28. You want to keep going, Sally?
Well, he said to divide it. I can keep going, but I've already read quite a bit. Do you want me to read further? How much further do you want me to read?
Okay, I can read if you want. That's fine.
Okay.
All right, verse 28. But the sheep escaped from the water and went forth into a wilderness where there was no water and no grass. And they began to open their eyes and to see. And I saw the master of the sheep pasturing them and giving them water and grass, and that sheep going and leading them. And that sheep ascended to the summit of that high rock, and the master of the sheep sent it to them. And after that I saw the master of the sheep who stood before them, and his appearance was great and awesome and majestic. And all the sheep saw him and were afraid before his face. And they all feared and trembled because of him. And they cried to that sheep with them, which was amongst them, "We are not able to stand before our master, or to look upon him." And that sheep which led them again ascended to the summit of the rock, but the sheep began to be blinded and to wander from the way which he had showed them, but that sheep was not thereof. And the master of the sheep was wrathful exceedingly against them, and that sheep discovered it, and went down from the summit of the rock, and came to the sheep, and found the greatest part of them blinded and fallen away. And when they saw it, they feared and trembled at its presence, and desired to return to their folds. And that sheep took other sheep with it, and came to those sheep which had fallen away, and began to slay them. And the sheep feared its presence, and thus that sheep brought back those sheep that had fallen away, and they returned to their folds. And I saw in this vision till that sheep became a man, and built a house for the master of the sheep, and placed all the sheep in the house. And I saw till this sheep which had met the sheep which led them fell asleep. And I saw till all the great sheep perished, and little ones arose in their place, and they came to a pasture, and approached a stream of water. Then that sheep, their leader, which had become a man, withdrew from them, and fell asleep. And all the sheep sought it, and cried over it with a great crying. And I saw till they ceased crying for that sheep, and crossed the stream of water. And there arose the two sheep as leaders in the place of those which had led them and fallen asleep. And I saw till the sheep came to a pleasant place, and a pleasant and magnificent land. And I saw till those sheep were satisfied, and the house stood amongst them in the pleasant land. And sometimes their eyes were opened, and sometimes blinded, till another sheep arose and led them and brought them all back, and their eyes were opened. And the dogs and the foxes and the wild boars began to devour those sheep, till the master of the sheep raised up another sheep, a ram from their midst, which led them. And the ram began to butt on either side of those dogs, foxes, and wild boars, till he had destroyed them all. And that sheep whose eyes were open saw the ram, which was amongst the sheep, till it forsook its esteem, and began to butt those sheep, and trampled upon them, and behaved itself indecently. And the master of the sheep sent the lamb to another lamb, and raised it to being a ram and leader of the sheep, instead of that ram which had forsaken its esteem. And it went to it and spoke to it alone, and raised it to being a ram, and made it the prince and leader of the sheep. But during all these, those dogs oppressed the sheep. And the first ram pursued the second ram, and the second ram arose and fled before it. And I saw till the dogs pulled down the first ram. And the second ram arose and led the little sheep. And those sheep grew and multiplied, but all the dogs and foxes and wild boars feared and fled before it. And the ram butted and killed the wild beasts, and those wild beasts had no longer any power among the sheep, and robbed them no more. And the ram brought forth many sheep and fell asleep, and a little sheep became a ram in its place, and became prince and leader of those sheep. And the house became great and broad, and it was built for those sheep. A tower high and great was built on the house for the master of the sheep. And the house was low, but the tower was elevated and high. And the master of the sheep stood on the tower, and they offered a full table before him. And again I saw the sheep that they again strayed, and went many ways, and forsook that their house. And the master of the sheep called some from amongst the sheep, and sent them to the sheep. But the sheep began to slay them. And one of them was saved, and was not slain. And it sped away, and cried aloud over the sheep. And they sought to slay it. But the master of the sheep saved it from the sheep, and brought it up to me, and caused it to dwell there. And many other sheep he sent to the sheep, to testify unto them, and lament over them. And after that I saw, when they forsook the house of the master, and his tower fell away entirely, and their eyes were blinded. And I saw the master of the sheep, how he wrought much slaughter amongst them in their herds, until those sheep invited that slaughter and betrayed his place.
And he gave them over into the hands of the lions and the tigers and the wolves and the hyenas, and into the hand of the foxes, and to all the wild beasts. And I saw that he forsook their house and their tower, and gave them all into the land of the lions, to tear and devour them into the hand of all the wild beasts. And I began to cry aloud with all my might, and to appeal to the master of the sheep, and to represent to him in regard to the sheep, that they were devoured by all the wild beasts. But he remained unmoved, though he saw it and rejoiced that they were devoured and swallowed and robbed, and left them to be devoured in the hand of all beasts. And he called 70 shepherds, and cast those sheep to them, that they might pasture them. And he spoke to the shepherd and their companions, let each individual of your pasture the sheep Haran, and all that I shall command you that do. And I will deliver them over to you, duly numbered, and tell you which of them are to be destroyed. And them you destroy. And they gave over to them those sheep. And he called another and spoke to him, observe and mark all that the shepherds will do to the sheep, for they will destroy more of them than I have commanded them. And every excess and the destruction which will be wrought through the shepherds, record how many they destroy according to the command, and how many according to their own desire. Record against every individual shepherd all the destruction he effects, and read out before me by number how many they destroy, and how many they deliver over for destruction, that I may have this as a testimony against them, and know every deed of the shepherds, that I may know and see what they do, whether or not they live by my command which I have commanded them. But they shall not know it, and you shall not declare it to them nor admonish them, but only record against each individual all the destruction which the shepherds effect, each in his time, and lay it all before me. And I saw it till the shepherds pasture in the season, and they began to slay and destroy more. And they delivered the sheep into the hand of the lions. And the lions and the tigers ate, and devoured the greater part of the sheep, and the wild boars ate along with them. And they burnt the tower, and demolished the house. And I became exceedingly sorrowful over the tower, because the house of the sheep was demolished. Afterwards I was unable to see if the sheep entered the house. And the shepherds and their associates delivered over to the sheep, to all the wild beasts, to devour them. And each one of them received in his time a definitive number. It was written by the other in the book how many each one of them destroyed of them. And each one slew and destroyed many more than was prescribed. And I began to weep and lament on account of those sheep. And thus in the vision I saw the one who wrote, how he wrote down every one that was destroyed by those shepherds day by day, and carried up and laid down, and even showed the whole book to the master of the sheep, all that they have done, and all that each one of them had made away with, and all they had given over to destruction. And the book was read before the master of the sheep. And he took the book from his hand and read it, and sealed and laid it down. And immediately I saw how the shepherds pastured for 12 hours. And see, 3 of those sheep turned back and came and entered and began to build up all that had fallen down of the house. But the wild boars tried to prevent them, but they were not able. And they began again to build as before, and they raised up the tower, and it was named the high tower. And they began again to place a table before the tower. But all the bread on it was polluted and not pure. And as regarding all this, the eyes of the sheep were blinded, so that they did not see, and the shepherds likewise. And they delivered them in large numbers to the shepherds for destruction. And they trampled the sheep with their feet and devoured them. And the master of the sheep remained unmoved, till all the sheep were dispersed over the field, and mingled with them, and they did not save them out of the hand of the beast. And the one who wrote the book carried it up and showed it and read it before the master of the sheep, and implored him on the account, and pleaded with him on the account as he showed him all the doings of the shepherds, and gave testimony before him against the shepherds. And he took the actual book and laid it down beside him and departed. Hallelujah.
Wow. There's a lot in that. The last part reminded me of Jeremiah. So it's about how the shepherds would destroy Yahuwah's flock, not taking care of them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was a lot of stuff from the canon in this vision right here.
It goes from the flood of Noah's day down to the great white throne judgment. And
right.
there it is, showing when they open the whole books that shows everything that the people had done. That's in verse 70 towards the end of it. And that's the great white throne judgment right there. And the book was read before the Lord of the sheep, and he took the book from his hand and read it and sealed it and laid it down. And only 3 of those shepherds turned back and began to build up all that had fallen down. But I mean, it's going to be a very hard judgment for those shepherds.
This whole wording of the whole chapter of 89 is like almost like a metaphor to the Father and the Son, because they're, Yahusha says that we are his sheep. He leads us to pasture. And Yahuwah in the Tanakh calls us his sheep. So it's like, I almost kind of saw like a oneness between the Father and the Son when it was talking about the master of the sheep. And just seeing, I think there's even more than, I think this vision actually goes even before the flood. I think it actually includes Mount Sinai right in the beginning. So it talks about, I came down.
That's after the flood, though. Mount Sinai.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's after the flood. My bad. That's what caught my attention was they saw his appearance, the master of the sheep, and they said, don't go near us. It's kind of like the same thing with on Mount Sinai. They told Masha, you speak to us, because if we go near Yahuwah, we'll die. If we see him face to face, we'll die.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I got from the beginning of the chapter.
Yeah, his appearance was great and terrible and majestic. And all those sheep saw him and were afraid before his face. That's the Mount Sinai experience. And it talks about the Exodus and how they were all brought across the sea and placed in the wilderness, and Yahusha fed them. He gave them water and food to eat. He gave them the manna. And it just completely goes all the way through history.
Mm. And I finally figured out, I think, why such a severity, because people have always asked me, even though this is kind of off topic, people have always asked me, what is your take on why it was such a big deal that Masha kicked the rock that he couldn't get into the land of Canaan? I think that's because he kicked Yahusha. Paul actually says in one of his epistles, he says that rock that gave you the water was Messiah. And so, In essence, Masha kicking that rock, the striking the rock with his staff, he was striking Messiah. He was striking Yahusha. And so
I never saw it that way. Wow, Doug, that was a good one.
So I think, I forget where it is. I forget if it's Romans or somewhere where it actually says, he says that rock in the wilderness was Messiah.
I know it says that rock, and he was that rock, but wow.
Yeah, he talks about he gave them that same spiritual drink. I forget how it's worded, but yeah, Paul's actually alluding to the rock in the wilderness, and that Yahusha was that rock. And to me, it makes a lot more sense now why Yahuwah was so angry that he struck the rock more than once. He was only supposed to strike the rock once, and then he got mad at the people and struck it again. So, so it kind of helps me understand why that was such a big deal to Yahuwah, why he was so mad.
That's a very interesting way to look at it, because I've often wondered not only about why was the punishment so great on Masha, but he didn't seem to punish Aharon when he built the golden calf. He created it.
Yeah, I think Aaron redeemed himself, if I remember correctly, because Aaron and his sons volunteered to basically slaughter the men that sinned.
That's true, yeah.
Yahuwah said to Masha, ask of the children of Yashrel who is with me. Like basically ask like, who's with me, who's against me. And the Levites right away were like, we're with Yahuwah. And he's like, okay, well, you're going to have to slaughter your brothers who sinned.
Yeah.
He's like, you know what? All right. So I think Aaron redeemed himself. I think Yahuwah showed him mercy. That's probably one of the biggest examples of mercy, is that Yahuwah didn't kill Aaron along with the others, that he actually allowed Aaron to live. But he did strike down his sons that brought straight fire. So
yes, he did.
Yeah.
He at times he can be merciful, and at times, he's just like, all right, you knew better. I got to punish you.
I've had it with you. Yeah, we have to always humble ourselves and realize that he is all powerful, and we have to be humble before him. This book is amazing. The more I get into Enoch, the more I see that it is one of the most amazing books that was ever created.
The end of this chapter talks about how all the shepherds are born. Now think about today with all these pastors and preachers, they're all preaching this false gospel, That definitely tells you of today.
Yes, I know, it is. It goes down to today, and then through the millennium and to the great white throne judgment, everything. It just tells the whole story of how the earth was mankind basically were gone so far astray that there weren't very many in the end that were redeemable at some point. I guess it's the shepherds that he's talking about that.
The shepherds he put to basically lead his flock, and they did the opposite. For me, I felt like I was reading Jeremiah 23 again. I was like, what? It's like the same terminology when Yahuwah's rebuking the shepherds of Yashrel, when he's saying, you've let, Jeremiah 23 is that same chapter that talks about these shepherds, these prophets of falsehood, and starts talking about they've made my people forget forget my name by their dreams, as they've forgotten me in the no, I think the Septuagint says they made my people forget my law by their dreams, which their ancestors have forgotten my name for in the worship of Baal. So
Yeah.
it's like that whole chapter, Jeremiah 23, is like mirroring what we just read in the last part. It's like false shepherds leading people to worship of other deities, and Christianity is just one of those outlets for false shepherds. I mean, there's false shepherds, so many different false shepherds. You have false shepherds of Buddhism, Judaism, Catholicism, Hinduism. I mean, all of them are false shepherds because they're leading Yahuwah's sheep away.
Yes, away from truth.
And Yahuwah's going to punish them. It says, in especially in Enoch, it's saying right here, he's saying that, according to all they've done, and could be referencing to Revelations where it talks about books were opened. And I believe there's going to be a book of our works, good and bad. There's going to be like a whole list Yahuwah's going to read to us. Actually Yahusha at the judgment seat is going to read to us. He's going to be like, all right, well, this you did was good, this you did was wrong. He's going to go through the whole dang list. He's going to be like,
yeah, that's in Revelation. Let me see if I can find it. And I saw, I found it, turned right to it, Revelation 20, starting verse 11. And I saw a great white throne, and him who was sitting on it, from whose face the earth and Shemayim fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw the dead, small and great, standing before the throne, and books were opened, and another book was opened, which is life. And the dead were judged from what was written in the books according to their works. There it is.
wow.
And Enoch saw the whole thing, from his time to all the way down through history.
It's crazy. Like, in one vision, Yahuwah gave him the story of what we know as the canon today. In one vision, Yahuwah basically summarized what we read in our scriptures, what we read from Genesis to Revelations. It's like crazy. It's like Yahuwah's like, all right, let me give you like a summarized version of what's later going to be written as my scripture. And he just gave it to him in one vision, which is crazy. So everyone that's been viewing, we're going to have to do a part 3 here. We're already down to 5 minutes left. So please stay tuned to the part 3. We will be starting chapter 90, and I believe 90 will be a pretty decent chapter too. So stay tuned, guys. We'll be right back. Shalom.